What is going on, everybody? This is Volume 7, the Intermezzo Variation, and I promise you it's going to be a lot quicker than the previous volume. The Intermezzo starts from the classical variation and deviates on move 5. So E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, E takes D, knight takes D4, bishop to C5, and white captures the knight on C6. Now in the classical variation, black does not want to capture the knight with the d-pawn because the queen exchanges leaves black no option other than to recapture with the king, taking the castling rights away from him. So they have to take with the b-pawn, kind of messing up their pawn structure, chopping it up into 3 different islands. Well, the way around that is bringing the queen to f6, which is the first move of the Intermezzo variation. You don't have to recapture the knight right away because black created a much bigger threat, and that is checkmate by bringing the queen down to f2. So white has to either guard the f2 square or block one of the 2 pieces from accessing it. Trying to block it and save your knight at the same time is dubious because black would just be able to recapture. The bishop is guarded by the queen still. They're still threatening checkmate on f2, and now they have a battery as well against the b2 pawn. So if you tried guarding the f2 pawn, now black would be able to capture the b2 pawn, and when you recapture with the bishop, they can go ahead and bring in their queen. And you have one move which saves your rook. And that is queen to c3. Black is not going to capture your queen and then be recaptured. No. They have queen to c1 checking your king. And you have no piece to block, so now your king must go to e2. Black has one move which keeps the advantage, and that's bringing the queen out to g5, and that does allow you to break up the pawns and capture c7, keeping material even. So if you want to play lines that I guarantee the opponent has no preparation for, by all means play that dubious line. Backing out of that dubious line, let's talk about legit ways to prevent black from checkmating on f2. There's 2,200 games in the database by masters. 1,100 of them choose to block with queen to d2. The other half choose queen to f3. I will mention that there are 24 games in the database by masters that they played f4. The computer does put this as 0 even, and out of the 24 games, 8 of them were draws. 8 of them were won by white, and 8 of them were won by black. So that's a kind of uncharted territory. There's not a lot of game theory on that. It's not proven if it's possible to play at the highest level. Maybe you could be, groundbreaking on that frontier if you choose. But the safest bet is the 2 main lines, which are queen d2 and queen f3. We're going to cover the queen d2 line first, and in my opinion, it's the better of the 2 for the simple reason there's less variations. There's less deviations from the main line. So from here, black's going to recapture your knight, and the main move is knight to c3. Black's going to bring their light-squared bishop out to e6, looking to castle queenside. Kind of looks funky, but you want to bring your knight to the edge to attack the dark squared bishop. But black has an intermezzo move, no pun intended, bringing the rook right to d8, hitting your queen. And if you run a game with these moves through the chess.com computer analysis, it'll mark bishop to d3 as a single exclamation point, a great move, which I don't disagree. Black can now put their bishop on d4, since the white queen can no longer attack that square, and it's out of the reach of the white knight for now. White can go ahead and castle, get their king to safety, and black may push b5, striking at that knight. The knight has safety on the c3 square, and this is a move that a couple people I've seen make tutorials have missed. The knight will come to e7 first, and white wants to strike out at that b pawn, so they'll push a4. And that's when the b pawn will march forward, hitting the knight on the b4 square, and the knight can jump to e2 now. And the bishop only has one defender, being the rook, so it can push up the c pawn to c5, defending it a second time. And that's when you can go off and exchange the bishop. The queen will recapture, and the white queen now you can move to f4 and get it out of harm's way with the potential of striking out at the c7 pawn. Black will push c4, and you can bring your bishop back to safety on the e2 square. And the knight can go ahead and jump to g6, hitting your queen, and that's where we're going to stop. But typically, I would say the best move from there would be to go ahead and snag that c7 pawn. There's really no sidelines on there, so let's go ahead and rewind it back to the move that you played, queen to d2. The other move being queen to f3, and let's break down some things that black's able to do from here. About 25% of the time, black will capture the queen. Another 25% of the time, the knight will be captured by the d pawn, and then 50% of the time, the knight will be captured by the b pawn. We're going to go down this line first. Next move by white is bringing the knight to d2, looking to bring it to b3 to attack the dark squared bishop. Black pushes d6, opening up a lane for their light squared bishop, and then white finishes the maneuver with their knight to b3. The dark squared bishop backs up to b6, also preventing any of black's rooks from accessing down the b file. And there's two moves for white, and they both diverge back together in the same set of moves 3 moves down the road. There's either a4, which black pushes a5 to prevent the bishop from being captured. Next, white will bring their bishop to d2. Black will capture the queen on f3, and white will recapture with their g-pawn. Now black is looking to castle kingside, so they'll bring their knight to e7. White will put their rook on g1, taking advantage of the newly opened g-file. Black will castle. White will put their dark squared bishop on e3 now. Black will capture and exchange off bishops. And after white recaptures, they'll push c5. And now that white has an opportunity to, they will castle queenside. And where those two lines diverge that I mentioned, one being a4, the other being bishop to d2. And then after that, black will exchange queens. And after white recaptures, the knight will come to e7. And then white will push a4, and black will push a5. So they've already diverged. And then obviously white finishes up with rook g1, black castles, white plays bishop e3, black exchanges, white recaptures, black pushes c5, and then white castles long. That's the main line if black chooses to recapture the knight originally on c6 with the b pawn. If they capture with the d pawn, instead of bringing your knight to d2, now you bring it to c3. Black's main move is e6 with the light squared bishop. And the main line is bishop to e3, but I'm going to recommend a move which Nepo plays. And Nepo has never lost a game in the Intermezzo Variation, so it's got to have some merit to it. It's pushing the a pawn to a3, and that primarily prevents the dark squared bishop from pinning your knight. Because in the main line, after you move bishop to e3, black has two options, and pinning your knight is one of them. If they pin your knight, you want to go ahead and castle queenside. Black will go ahead and take out your knight after you castle, and you have to recapture with your b pawn. Black's got two moves from here. He can either take out the c3 pawn or just set his queen on e5, which has a lot of different possibilities from here. We're going to back up now. Other than pinning your knight, the other move that Black has is exchanging off your queen. And you have to recapture with the only piece you have, the g2 pawn on the f3 square. And now Black will usually go ahead and exchange off your dark squared bishop as well, and you have to capture with the only pawn you have as well, the f pawn on the e3 square. Your pawns are pretty messed up, and you'll have a decent game, but not as good as you potentially could have if you did push that a3 pawn like Nepo does. And last but not least, in the queen to f3 variation, we have the move queen captures queen. And if that happens, you want to go ahead and capture the black queen first, and now Black will capture your knight. It'll do so with the d pawn. You can bring your bishop to e3. Black will be more than glad to exchange off bishops, and you recapture with your f pawn. Now they'll bring their bishop out to e6, and you can slide your rook over to g1, taking advantage of the hole you created when you recaptured the black queen. They'll go ahead and push the g-pawn to prevent you from getting in, and you can bring your knight to d2, preparing to castle queenside. Black just has to go ahead and develop their knight to f6, the best one according to the computer, before you're allowed to do so. So go ahead and castle queenside, and Black has several moves which score 0.5, 0.6, keep the analysis the same. One of them being castling queenside. They can go ahead and just bring the rook over to d8 all by its own. They can push the a pawn to a5, or they can even move the king completely out of the way and put it on e7. That's my favorite looking line. I've never played this variation, but this allows both rooks to be connected, and there's no interference if either of them has to swing from one end to the other. That is going to wrap up things over here. It's definitely an interesting line that not too many people know about, because you wouldn't think off the bat if you don't capture the knight with the B or D. A move that's not instantly a check or a checkmate is even thinkable. So I appreciate you guys, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you.